Okay, welcome everyone. Just going to take a few minutes here, make sure that we can get some folks to come on board and check out our conversation today, Courage in Sports. I'm going to be joined here shortly by LoSco, dear friend and colleague of mine. So for those of you that are just joining, and LoSco, feel free to join the conversation and I'll accept you in the chat. But for those of you that are just joining us, feel free to drop a comment letting us know where you're joining in from. And we'll get started here shortly. Welcome everyone. For those of you just joining, okay. Here we go. Thursday afternoon. I think we got LoSco on the line. Do that. Hey, there he is. There he is.
What's up?
How's it going, man?
It's going well. Hold on, let me do this.
Nice to see you. This is I'm like spoiled. I get to see you twice in 1 week. That's pretty awesome.
I know, right?
Yeah.
That's not a normal. That's not a normality. That's pretty rare. So I'm excited to see you too.
Yeah. Yeah. So as people just join, I'm just gonna welcome people. So we're gonna chat for a little bit about courage in sports and stoicism. So for those of you that are joining, feel free to drop a message in the chat. If you've got any questions for me or LoSco, feel free to drop that in the chat too. We'll try to get to them and maybe just check in around where you're joining today. And so I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Jolicoeur. I'm the program manager with Blueprint. And we're a not-for-profit based out of the University of British Columbia, and we work towards enhancing the well-being and integrity of men in communities. You know, we do programmatic work, we do influence work, we're doing research right now, and I get to work with LoSco on some of this stuff as well. You know, LoSco is someone who's well-versed in sport and the work of men, as someone who's both been in the military and someone who was an NCAA Division I football player, and then a coach, performance and player development coach at U.S. Army West Point. And so today, you know, part of this conversation, part of the work that we're doing at Blueprint is really raising the bar around having these conversations around masculinity and the issues that impact men and the people that men relate to. And this month is the Canadian Men's Health Month. And so in collaboration with our partner, the Canadian Men's Health Foundation, we're doing some outreach and conversations on Instagram with some key influencers in the space. And so I'm really happy to be able to have this conversation with my friend and colleague LoSco today. And so with that said, LoSco, do you want to maybe share a little bit about yourself and how you came to be working with us and the work that you're doing right now?
Well, I mean, you pretty much said it all, but I will say though, just while I was at West Point working, having met Dr. Izzo and kind of seeing the programming in its genesis, you know, and just the impact that it had with our players, I thought it was absolutely amazing. So I feel fortunate in that I've had an opportunity to work with you on really like getting this to more teams, you know. So I'm fortunate in that way. So like I mean we had a session earlier this week. So like you said earlier, I'm kind of spoiled because I get to see you twice in 1 week.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, it's amazing. And I'll also say this too. You know, I think it's always a blessing to know that like you're valued, right? And there are some things that people might ask you to do simply because they value you. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you can do everything that people ask of you, right? But when I was asked to help just even facilitate with Blueprint, I thought it was important because I think from my own personal experience and then even from a coaching experience, the work that a lot of men, especially men in sport, escape as a result of being an athlete is not necessarily healthy for the end state of that individual. There's a lot of internal work that we seem to escape sometimes just because we're an athlete. And there's certain things that are expected of athletes and things that aren't expected of athletes that can give us room to escape some of that internal work that we have to do for ourselves. So I'm sorry, my phone is sliding on you, but that's why I thought it was important, and I'm fortunate to even be able to work with and partner with y'all. So I'm excited to be here tonight.
Yeah, awesome, man. And yeah, that's Dr. John Izzo, and he's one of the co-founders in collaboration with Dr. Duncan Shield and Dr. David Kuhl, founded Blueprint, and really the impetus of the work that we're doing today and why we're here today talking about this. So shout out to those guys as well. And so I'm calling in from Comox territory on Vancouver Island in British Columbia in Canada. Where are you calling in from, LoSco?
I'm currently in Georgia, so I'm calling. I've kind of been all over the place, but currently I'm calling from Georgia, here in the United States.
You're kind of all over the place because you're in school, right? You're back at school.
Yeah, so I finished the year out in New Jersey, so I left there a couple. Well, anyway, yeah, I've been in and out of New Jersey. I'm about to leave here, and I'll be back in New Jersey probably by the end of the month. So I've kind of been all over the place, yeah.
Nice. And what's your journey like been, growing up in the United States as an athlete and, playing for West Point, coaching at West Point, becoming a professional, doing the work that you're doing, and now you're back at school, right? Can you take us on a journey of your trajectory as an athlete and where you're
now? What a journey, right? So I'll say this. I think just as a result of being an athlete, and I don't necessarily know that this is unique to American sports, but I will say that being an athlete from 6 years old all the way through high school, going into college, and then coming out of college, the one thing that I've noticed, at least for myself internally, but then also just as a result of being in the position that I was in at West Point and having the opportunity to work with other athletes with other programs, the number one thing that I wrestled with, and that I think that I've seen other people wrestle with, though they may not use this language, is identity, right? It's like, who am I outside of playing this sport? And just my journey, man, like running through college, that was a big thing for me. Like I knew I was a part of a football team. I knew that I was part of something that was bigger than myself. And we can hide behind that, right? Like we hide behind these colloquialisms and these anecdotes. We're part of something bigger than ourselves. It's not about me. It's like, yes, all of that is true. All of that is wonderful. But at the end of the day, when you go home, you have to deal with you. So I think for me, my journey was rather unique because I am pretty I'm pretty anchored in my faith, and that's really important to me. So I used that to kind of help define some things for me so that I could work through that. But it was tough because there was a lot of things that were asked of me to be and do as a result of being an athlete that almost sometimes were antithetical to who I believed myself to be. So
there's tension there, right? There was a tension.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And I didn't, and I'll go so far as to say that I don't know that I dealt with that until after I even graduated. I don't think I stepped into it fully. It was like I was aware of it as an athlete, but it wasn't until I stepped away from being an athlete and had to go into like real life where I had to deal with it. Like I absolutely had to deal with it. I didn't have sports to kind of hide. So I don't know that I dealt with it until after I graduated. And after that, I started asking these questions, about who am I? What am I? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be? And then after wrestling with a lot of those questions, probably for a good 2 to 3 years, finding myself back at West Point in the position of director of player development, now I'm a lot more settled in who I am, looking at a lot of athletes who either are wrestling with the same question or haven't even known to ask it of themselves, right?
Right.
So yeah, that was a unique position for me to be in. I really enjoyed it. And as a matter of fact, one of the classes that I had an opportunity to work with, who were sophomores when I got there, just graduated from the academy, and oh man, like just the amount of pride and joy that that I have is amazing. Just to see them do that, but just to work with those guys and to see that there are things that they're wrestling with and asking questions, like those one-on-one conversations where they might come to me and say, "Hey, Coach LoSco, like I'm kind of dealing with this, and I don't really know how to address it." You know what I mean? And it's like internal things or things with relationships, and these are all things that Blueprint is addressing, which is why I absolutely love it. So for me, kind of being in that space was really awesome. Now finding myself back in school and not only having dealt with that identity for myself, but then also starting to see myself working with athletes and helping them deal with it, I'm even more settled on who I am. So now that I'm in school, especially when you're in like a master's program and there's all these other things going on, or when I say things going on, I mean different mindsets, different thoughts, theories, beliefs, all these things. You find yourself more anchored in who you are, a lot less anxious when other things are presented to you, and you know what to say no to, you know what to reject, which I think is important. So it's pretty cool. So, but I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the relationships that are forming out of it. So it's been great. I've been enjoying it.
Yeah, it sounds like a big part of your journey really allowed yourself to kind of question while being within the confinements of one sport, football. And also, I'm really curious how that intersected with the fact that you were at West Point. Like, shout out to West Point, but Army military, right? In the military, like, how did those cultures collide in your trajectory through it as an athlete?
I would say like, and then you put on your Army uniform, right? You take that off, and then you put on your uniform that you have to wear to go to school, and I had to be a person. So it's almost as if those worlds didn't collide. But at the end of the day, it was still me having to fill those uniforms, right?
Yeah.
So I would say they collided in that in each one, I had to figure out what worked for me.
Right.
Like who was I going to be in each uniform? I know what's required of me in each uniform. Which parts of myself can I bring in each uniform, in each hat that you wear, right? Hat or helmet, right? So all of that was kind of the things that I was wrestling with and dealing with to say, okay, now that I'm discovering who I am, now I get to discover what parts of me I can bring to each thing that I'm engaged in.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I had a similar experience, growing up in a small northern town, family of boys playing hockey and, being kind of corralled into this culture of hockey and what it means to be a man, a male hockey player. Right. And so I was always curious, how the military culture was layered onto your relationship to football, right? Like, we're talking about courage in sport today. We're going to talk about stoicism. We're going to talk about all the things that, that we're told as athletes to do. But I'm really curious, like, did you find relative to your peers that weren't at a military school or were in the military that there was an extra layer of kind of you know, more rigid culture around what you were told to be as a man, as an athlete?
Yes, most definitely. I think well, I have to say this first though. I think just as a result of being at an academy in such a small community, um, where it's almost like you're in your own world, so there isn't as much engagement outside of it. So you almost learn to live by those rules and play those games. Um, and when I say games, you know what I mean. I just mean you learn to play by those rules, right? Uh,
What were some of those rules? Like, what do you think some of those rules that someone that maybe have not gone through the military culture would have been?
yeah. So I mean, and then also let me say this too. Um, I think while I was at the academy, and then even while I was in the army, there was a shift happening within the military culture that was becoming more tolerant, that was becoming more diverse. So it was really heavy tension,
Yeah.
but tension in the right direction. So I want to start by saying that. But some of the rules that you learn very quickly are, you know, you have to be tough, you have to be strong, you have to you have to have all the answers, right? You have to be smart, knowledgeable. You have to be the best, right? And it's not healthy all the time. I think that it can be motivating, but it's not healthy all the time, especially for those who are highly competitive and find themselves in environments where they're comparing what works for someone else with what they do.
Yeah.
But that's not what I do, right? So I have to learn what I do, what works well for me, how I lead, what my style is. And yeah, man, like it was, especially within like the military culture, for once again, and when I say military culture, I mean the culture within which I was in the military, where there was this tension going on, and you know, at least an effort to go in the right direction, away from some of these stereotypes and traditional motifs within the military. So that's the context in which I'm speaking. Um, it was a challenge because there are so many voices on one end that might be a little more traditional that'll tell you this is the kind of person you got to be. And then there's some other voices that are saying, we're not there anymore, we're pushing on. So really, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. I had to find my true identity and to say what part of me is needed in this space.
Yeah.
And it might shift. It's the same organization, but it might shift from when I'm talking to the person who might be more traditional, from when I'm talking to the person who may not be. It's the same organization, but it's different people. I'm needed in both spaces. So how do I bring who I am to help both people? Um, that's not easy. You have to kind of really work through it. It takes some time, and it takes courage. And this is so recently someone asked me, um, my volume is in and out.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out there. Yeah. We can hear you, but it's cutting in and out a little bit.
Okay, hold on. Let me.
And for those of you just joining us, this is a great time. Feel free to drop us a question in the chat box. If you've got any comments, we'll try to get to them. And we got LoSco back. You can hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's great.
Is it better?
It's better, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, consistent. Yeah, so I'm hearing you say like you really had to put like a stake in the ground around what you wanted to be in an environment that was changing, right? And what we're knowing in the world, so much in the world is changing as a result of the need to be more inclusionary, the need to understand the importance of diversity, part of a team, right? You're a part of the military team, you're a part of the football team, right?
Yep.
And so I'm really hearing you say that that was like an act of courage for yourself to kind of step into a place where you're like, I need to know where I am in this, and this is how I feel comfortable being able to, you know, play at the rules in both games that were happening, right? And how was that with your teammates in the institution of the military? Like, how was that experience for you? because it seems like a really, really courageous act. I mean, I've never been in the military, but I know from a sports perspective, that would have, in my time would have been like really an act of, by some would look like an act of resistance, by others would be looking like an act of a real champion, right? Of someone who's stepping up. So
I think, especially within a military context, we're always taught that we are to be apolitical as a military, especially um, an American military perspective, is that we are not to be involved with like politics. And the reason I say that is because it's almost as if we're taught and indoctrinated to strip ourselves of our own beliefs in order to participate within an organization. But here's the thing that I think is a positive of that. Not that it's all positive, but there is a positive. I think the positive is that it shows you that who you are is more than what you think and believe. And you can bring yourself to that without pushing one thing or another and still be you, right? So when you ask the question, how is that with your teammates? And this is the same within sports or within any organization, whether it's military, business, whatever it might be. The process is finding the courage to be you, even if it's at a cost to a relationship, right? It's about managing that to say, hey, listen, it's more important to me to be me than it is for me to try to capitulate to the standards or stereotypes of others within this organization for the sake of some form of a work relationship or whatever it might be. And we can still have both, right? I don't have to sacrifice one or the other. And I think that's really what it taught me. And for me personally, the courage part of it was doing it even when I wasn't sure of what that meant for me. It was trying things, right? It was discovering through practice, like trying different things with people in terms of relationships or language, or just dynamics being around people, or even trying things that I've never tried before just to see if that's something that I would actually enjoy or like. All of these parts are parts of self-discovery. And if we rob ourselves of self-discovery, then you're never truly going to know what works for you. You'll kind of be given a set list of rules to follow within each team you're on, each organization you're in, whatever job you might have. You'll find yourself doing those things rather than following the rules that you set for yourself. I think one of the most important things that we do with Blueprint is having them.
By them, you mean the athletes that we work with?
Just
for folks that are following with, the athletes we work with,
I think one of the most important things that we do is ask them what kind, and right, like whatever team we might be working with, asking them what kind of person do you want to be? Because that's a question that many of us have thought about, but have never truly like asked ourselves or considered so much as to answer it, right? Like we've thought about these concepts of, like I want to be nice, you know what I mean? Like one day, like I want to be able to do this for others. But it's like, okay, those are actions, but separating what you do from who you are, who do you want to be? And having them go through that exercise, I think is so incredibly important, particularly at such an important time in your life, like in a college atmosphere, because this is really the time where you're solidifying those things, right? If they've not already been done, these are the times where you are solidifying them. So having the opportunity to do that at that age is really important, because like you were asking, what I found for me was that I was trying it in a professional space, right? Like here I am in the Army after having graduated, knowing that I was wrestling with these things as a college athlete, but now I'm a professional. I've got a whole platoon who's looking at me for leadership. I'm still trying to figure out my own leadership, trying to figure myself out. not altogether confident in who I am, trying to figure out who I am. And the courage part of it for me was, even though I was afraid to and wasn't even certain about it myself, having the courage to say, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to see if this is me. And also part of the courage is leaving things that no longer serve you, right? It's like, I did these things in the past. These were things that seemed to work, but now I'm discovering that that's not really who I am. That's not really what works for me. So having the courage to leave some of those things behind is also important, right? Like leaving some of those old rules, right, behind. I think that's really important too.
Yeah, and that's the courage part right there, right? Because it's really scary. It means
Questioning the thing that we've known for so long, and really trying to go deeper and to understand our truth beyond the culture, beyond what we're told from the external world, how we should be or who we should be, right? And so really that in itself is like a really strong piece of courage for me, is like really being able to be okay with letting go. And, the work that we do together is supporting guys to really sit with the question of, who do I want to be, right? Like what you said, who do I want to be? And, for a lot of guys, we know that this is the first time that they're given the opportunity to really reflect on that beyond being an athlete, right?
Yeah.
And so, I also heard you say, professionally, yeah.
What you just said, I think, at least what I saw from working with the athletes at West Point, and then even working with athletes with Blueprint, I think the one thing that I'm seeing our guys starting to exhibit courage, even going through the programming, is they now have a space where they can be courageous enough to answer it in a way that's honest, which takes courage, but then also that might be contradictory to that which they may have been given, the scripts that they may have been given in their life, right?
Yeah.
Because all throughout your childhood, all throughout high school, especially when you play a sport, you're given a script, and for the most part, you play your script, you play your role. Now I'm in a space where I get to discover what that is for me, and having a space where I can honestly answer these questions and to start to reject old scripts and old rules is really, really important. And that is courage. Courage is not like, and I had a conversation recently. Someone asked me, what were 3 things that made a good communicator? Now, historically, the first thing that I would have said is confidence, right? But I've learned after having spoken that confidence is not always there. But to communicate effectively, courage always has to be.
Yeah.
Because even if you're not confident, courage comes up and allows you to do it, even if you're still afraid, even if you're still anxious. Having courage, right? Like there is no courage if there is absence of fear. So even if you're afraid, right? Do it afraid. Be who you were called to be afraid, right? Even if this isn't altogether familiar for you, right? It's like something that might feel right may not be familiar. So it's like, this feels right, but I've not done this before. Do I have the courage to do it anyway? Do I have the courage to be that person anyway? Do I have the courage to step up anyway? So I think that's really important. Having a space where you can do that honestly and be non-judgmentally clear about who you want to be. And then being courageous enough to invite other people in on that, which, is one of the huge things that you harp on, is also important. So the
accountability,
right? But the first step to that is being courageous enough to tell yourself the truth about you.
Yeah. And a part of that, and this is what we do in our program, right? And this is what I'm hearing you share in your experience, is to be courageous. You're talking about honesty, but what I'm hearing too is vulnerability, right? A willingness to be vulnerable to yourself, right? And so when we actually provide the space to men to get quiet and to get reflective and to be honest with themselves in a vulnerable way that's non-judgmental, in a way that doesn't feel like there's a needed outcome. They don't need to do anything. They just need to be, and to be real with themselves, right? And so, we talk a lot of Blueprint around permission givers, right? How, who are the people that actually provide the space and the opportunity and the safety for people to be able to step into vulnerability, to people to be able to step into courage. And I'm curious, in your experience, both in the military, as an athlete, as a coach, you know, what do you think are the barriers for people to actually get there, to be vulnerable, to be courageous? What are the things that kind of hinder that for folks to get to?
So, you know this, Evan, but my passion is leadership, and there's this thing that I've kind of been like really looking into in terms of like the vulnerability of a leader. And I think the cultures that we build are based on our abilities to be vulnerable. And this is what I mean by that. I believe that one of the hardest things for leaders to say and individuals to say is, I don't know, because that's vulnerable. It's vulnerable to say, I don't know, especially in my experience, especially within the military context, when you're supposed to have the answers, right? Like you're supposed.
When people are looking to you to have the answer.
So to say, I don't know, almost seems as if you're failing, right? It seems as if you're not doing your job. It seems as if you're not a good person. You're not a good leader. But I think one of the big barriers that I have seen is, especially there's this thing in culture nowadays, man, where it seems like everybody has to have the right answer to everything. And that's just not even practical. So when it comes to ourselves, like who we are, we often fall into the trap of feeling as though we have to have all the answers to that too, right? Like, I would go so far as to say that we are least experted in ourselves.
Yeah.
You know? And it's about discovering that. Do you have the patience with yourself, the grace with yourself, the compassion for yourself to take time to learn yourself so that you can become a better version of yourself? And I think one of the barriers to our own vulnerability with ourselves is this constant pressure to always have the answers, this constant pressure to always feel as though you've got things figured out. And then especially when you bring into that context with into the relationships with others, or the relational context, it's almost as though a lot of times we're expected, or maybe we have internal pressures to be for others who we think we should be for others, which often puts pressure on ourselves to not only have the answers for ourselves, but to have answers for them, right? You know,
and that leads to like a host of like really nasty feelings, right? Self-critical, you have shame, guilt, you know, judgment about yourself, right? It creates distance and disconnection from others, right? And we know, especially with men and men who play sports as well, there's a lot of rigidity around like what it means to be an athlete, what it means to be a man, right? And so that just gets layered on top of that.
100%. And you know, like, I think we're in a unique time and space in the world, and I'll even say particularly in America, where a lot of these definitions, a lot of these ideas are shifting. They're becoming a lot more, I would even argue to say they're becoming a lot more technically sound, or definitively sound, to say we want to be clear about what we mean when we say man. We want to be clear about what we mean when we say male. We want to be clear about what we mean, right? Like, we're becoming a lot more definitively sound, which I think is beautiful. But I think while we are doing that, there creates this tension, particularly for those of us who have been raised in contexts that have not been definitively sound, and that have given us who we should be as men from the context of what we needed to be in that space. And this is what I mean. What it means to be a football player can have some aspects of it that transition, or rather that have some properties that help you to be a good man. But being a good football player does not make you a good man. being a good athlete does not make you a good man. There's a lot more to it that we have to embrace, to say there's a lot more to me. So when we talk about courage, you know, before this we briefly spoke about, you know, stoicism, right? That serves you well in the military. That serves you well as an athlete in combat sports, especially combat sports that are team sports. It serves you well, but there is a time to shut it off. Right? There is a time to dig into yourself and to be emotional and to be vulnerable, and to have people with whom you can do that with. All of that is important, especially as men, but sometimes we've not been given that as one of the scripts or rules to follow as a man. So having the courage to really dig into that, and I think even having the courage to admit that you don't have that, or that you need help with that, right? Mm-hmm. That you need help discovering that part of yourself, because it's there, right? It's not that it's gone somewhere and you have to go get it, right? It's in you, but it might be buried and you might need some help to get that out.
And I think that's the piece right there, right? So if you're getting all this really beautiful reflections back at you, that stoicism is helping you, your performance on the field is great, you're able to show up for your teammates, you know, it's a lot of positivity is coming back around being stoic. And then there are aspects of yourself, your relationship, whether to yourself or others, are suffering or you're having challenges. And part of stoicism says, suck it up.
Yep.
You know, tie up your shoelaces and get back out there, you know? And so I'm curious, you know, you were talking about it, you can have it all, right? But like, what is it, where are we at, and what's it going to take for the sports world, for athletes to really embrace the idea that you can ask for help?
I think it takes other athletes doing it, honestly. And I think where we are just globally, with the spotlight on American athletes, particularly like the big names, so much attention is drawn to them. And I think the more they do it, the more it becomes acceptable in other spaces, for collegiate athletes to do it, high school athletes to do it, middle school athletes to do it. In each context and space, I think it becomes more acceptable and more understood. But honestly, beyond that, because I think there's this misconception that athletes at that level have a responsibility to teach and grow other people.
Right.
They have incredible platforms, and for those who choose to use those platforms to do those kinds of work, they should be commended. I think they should be celebrated. But all of our growths, like all of our personal growths, are our own responsibilities. So I really think that it's like, that's kind of macro, but on the micro level, I think the way that we get there is by having more educated communities, more educated youth coaches, right? Mm-hmm. More educated high school and collegiate coaches, people who are in these athletes' lives, who can really help them to embrace these parts of themselves and to really develop these parts of themselves. Because, you know, though there may be 100 and some odd million people following a LeBron James on Instagram, every collegiate athlete's not. Every high school athlete is not. So who's going to touch that individual? And you know something? Some of the hardest stuff that I've had to deal with, just within, like, even for myself personally, but then even like as a coach, we're dealing with athletes who dealt with traumatic injury, for whom their seasons or even careers were done.
They're done. Yeah.
And the reason that was tough was because they were forced, for the first time of their in their lives, especially their adult lives, to deal with themselves, not their teammates, not the win column, not like nothing. They were forced to deal with themselves and ask themselves these questions for the first time. Who am I? What am I going to do? What do I want to do? Who do I want to be in the world? How do I want to show up? And it's hard, man. If you've not dealt with that, if you've not asked yourself these questions, it is extremely hard. But when you have coaches, when you have other athletes, when you have a community of people who are more educated on these things, who are more supportive of these types of discovery, and who also understand how important those things are for team cohesiveness and culture. I mean, not only are you helped in forms of your teams being better, you have better teams,
Right.
but you have better people on those teams.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the individual can move on with their lives, because 100% of anybody who's ever played any sports is going to have to retire. So being able to move on, man, is really important. But when you have a community of people who can help you do that, it's everything.
Yeah, and there's a lot of movement right now, right, around that. We're doing work with coaches. We've got a coaches program called the Influential Coach that you've been a part of helping build. You know, Dr. David Kuhl, one of our co-founders, has worked in the transition space from career athletes moving out. The Canadian Olympic Committee is doing stuff with their Olympians, how to support Olympians after they're done with all the spotlight and all the excitement, right? We set these athletes up. Athletes are set up their whole lives to get to a certain point in their athletic career. How are we setting them up to be a good human being? How are we setting them up to be resilient in the face of challenging relationship problems, financial problems, spiritual, emotional, all the things, right? And so, I mean, I'm curious, you know, we're doing the work, but I'd love for you to share a little bit with the folks who are watching, you know, what needs to be done to address mental health and to support emotional well-being. You know, as someone who is a coach and, you know, you did this work with your athletes, you know, how do we move away from isolation and suppression and the focus on athlete before person, athlete before human being? What would you say to a coach out there listening? What are some of the things that they can consider doing in their relationships with their athletes?
Without a doubt, hands down, the very first thing that I would say to any coach, any parent, anybody who's ever going to touch an athlete who wants to help them deal with these sorts of things in their lives and to be more cognizant and aware of these things in their lives is probably the hardest thing to tell a coach or a parent or anybody who's going to touch an athlete, which is this: deal with you first. Start here. Because when you become aware of you, you become that much more keenly aware of your athletes. Like when you start to deal with your own emotional issues, then you'll start to address, well, that athlete is not a bad athlete, or they don't have a bad attitude. They've got an emotional problem. The reason that I can see that is because I saw it with me, you know?
Yeah.
Like when you deal with you, like, man, I'm telling you, like when I started working on me, I could touch those guys a whole lot better because I saw it better. I could understand it better. I could speak to it in a way that wasn't just from a book or from a seminar, right? You can take all the classes you want. You can do all these programs you want. But until you start digging into you, you're not going to be as effective as you could and should be. So I think that's the first thing that I would say, man. Like if you're a coach, if you're a parent of an athlete.
And that takes courage too, right?
Yeah, man.
Right, because it's like, oh, I'm showing up for my athletes, but it's like you got to show up for yourself first.
Yeah, like so. I remember when I was at West Point, and we had a staff meeting, and no, we had a staff meeting, but then after the staff meeting, we had to run into like this department-wide thing, right? And we were talking about, it was just all the coaches, all the staff within the entire athletic department. We're sitting in this big room. And we're all throwing around ideas about how we can connect more with the athletes, right? So what was amazing to me is that some of the most rudimentary things escape the minds of some of these people, where it's like, with all these elaborate things, it's like, hey, I got an idea. Why don't you talk to them? You know what I mean? Right. But here's what I learned. The reason it was tough for a lot of coaches and some of these staff, these athletic staff, to talk to the players was because how do you connect without opening up?
Right.
You can't. And they don't want to. They don't want to open up because when I do, I don't know what's in there. I don't know what's going to come out. So when you really start dealing with you, yes, it takes courage, but I'm telling you, oh my goodness, it is so worth it. Like the cultures that you build on those teams, and I'll share this. When I started at West Point, I remember talking to our head coach, Coach Monken, and he was kind of telling me about the culture of the team, where they were. And really my job was to kind of help us like build that to where he really wanted that to be. So he shared some things with me, and really where we were in a space where it was like the players had their own little things going on. They weren't all together, like working on themselves. They kind of thought, they were hot stuff. And then you had coaches who couldn't really connect with that group. And that, it was all of these little things going on. But at the heart of it, man, it was a whole lot of people who were trying to be what they thought the institution or organization needed them to be in order to win.
Yeah.
But it wasn't who they were. And that wasn't just players, it was coaches too.
So what does that do to people? Like, how does that show up? How do you think that impacts folks? If that's the whole way of being is focused on winning and is focused on what someone else wants them to be. Like, how did that show up? How did you notice that? What were the impacts?
So here's the way that I think of and I say it. You end up with a whole lot of hands and not a lot of hearts. You end up with a lot of people doing things, but not a lot of people being them. And hands always work better when the heart is in it. When your heart, like when who you are can show up fully, I give more of who I am because I'm here, Yeah. So the way that looks practically, watch this. Here's the way that it looks practically. It looks like people showing up, doing their jobs, and then not being able, like they do their job, they're proficient, they're professional, they can do their jobs really well, but they can't wait to leave so that they can be themselves, right? It's the idea of when you go into your job, you're wearing your nice suit and tie, and you're doing really well, you're efficient, you're effective, you're getting the job done, but you can't wait to get back in that car, take that tie off, go home, take the jacket off, and just hang out in some basketball shorts, because that's when you have environments that are conducive to people being who they truly are, not only can they be proficient and professional, efficient and effective, but they can be themselves. And when they do become and be themselves in these environments, creativity goes up, camaraderie goes up, connections go up, because I'm not just connecting with you for professional purposes, but now I can actually connect with who you are as a person. So your entire culture gets better. And that's really what we want to do, right? We don't just want teams that can win games, right? Because inevitably you're going to reach that opponent who's just as talented, if not more talented than you. What's going to win it in that game? It's not going to be your talent that's going to win that game. In other words, it's not going to be your competence that wins that game. It's going to be your culture that wins that game. And if you don't have a culture that's connected, you lose every time. So it looks like people actually connecting with and loving each other for who they are, like being a good brother, being a good sister on these teams, and actually showing up for one another, because my workouts get better. My film room is more attentive and focused because it's not just about me doing my job, but it's about me connecting with someone else. So, man, it goes far and beyond just.
And that's courage again, right? That's it. That's the topic of today's chat is courage, and it's like that takes courage, LoSco, right? For folks to say, I get it. We're here for sports, and the goal of sports is to win and to move and to connect and all the other things, but really to win. Especially in an organization like a university, right, or professional sports, like we got to win. So do what you got to do to win. And so to be able to take a moment of pause to realize and to embody and to actually put into practice what it means, like to connect on a human level, right, to create a culture of connection. And then let's get to the work. Then let's do the scrimmage and the practice and the conditioning and the strategizing, the performance side of sports, right?
Yeah, man.
So
like, I think sometimes people look at work like this and they think that it's optional. They think that it's ancillary. That's like, it's almost like a cherry on top. It's like icing. It's like, no, this is the cake, right? Like this is the real deal.
Yeah.
When you have this stuff, like when you can, when a coach can approach a player and a player feels comfortable enough to tell that coach what they may be struggling with emotionally. Because here's the thing, you'll have players who will suffer in silence, show up on Saturday, play a game, make a mistake, and the mistake be a result of something that's happening here and not anything that was happening on that field.
You're right.
But because they couldn't deal with it, because they didn't have a space to deal with it, they made the mistake. Or they didn't put out their best effort, or they couldn't put out their best effort. They didn't even know that they were limited. It's like, I feel like I'm exerting all my energy and all my effort, but I'm so emotionally drained that I can't. So if you don't have a coach, if you don't have somebody on that team or even in that community who that player knows they can go to talk to open up to talk about some of this stuff, man, this is the cake. This is how you win. Do you want to win? You have to have cultures that are conducive to winning. And cultures conducive to winning are cultures of individuals who know who they are, who are comfortable enough to be who they are, and know that they have a team and community around them that supports who they are. And not only support in the form of affirmation, but also accountability to say, hey, listen, I know the kind of person you said you want to be, and today you just didn't show up as that. What's going on? Do we got to talk about something? Are you okay?
How can we lift each other up?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the cake, bro.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, one of the things that we hear often in the work is like, we got to check the box. Have you spoken to the counselor? Like, we're trying to do the healing work. We're trying to do the human work, where it's like the human work just needs to be, there just needs to be space, right? Like, you know, a lot of the idea is like, okay, you got shit going on at home, deal with it. Do what you need to do to deal with it. And I think that that's a subtle, we need to change that really subtly, rather than like trying to do something that it puts the person's problem at the center. We put the person before the problem, right, or the issue. And so I think that's a little bit about what we're doing in our coaching program, right? And what we're talking to the athletes about is like, you know, how to center yourself as a means to get to all the goals and all the things that you want to do in your life, including what you want to do as an athlete, including what you want to do with your team as a coach.
Yeah. And right. You want to know something that I've learned, Evan? Just by seeing. People are now coaching a generation of athletes who are getting a whole lot more emotional work than coaches.
Yeah.
So our players are now more aware of themselves in ways that coaches never have been. So that's why I say it's important for coaches to do this stuff first, to work on them first, because a lot of times these players they can spot it before the coach does. And the coach is left wondering. I was having a conversation recently with a guy who coaches at Princeton. He's been there for like 30 some odd years. And he was saying, you know, back in the day, you just said whatever you wanted to say to a player, you know, like you just kind of got in their tail. You just like let them have it. That's just the way we coached. But if we had this stuff 30 or 40 years ago, man, there's no telling like how much further along we would be. Yeah. So a lot of times these coaches, especially some of the mainstays and people who have been in the game for a while, they haven't been exposed to this kind of stuff. So sometimes our players are a little bit more involved in these areas than our coaches are, which is, I think, wonderful. I think it's great that our players are getting exposed to this stuff. But this is why I say it's important for all of us to continue to work on us so that we can be better tools to serve the people that we care about, the teams that we care about, the organizations that we care about.
Yeah. Sweet. You know, in kind of closing, I'm really curious, you know, we've talked about courage, we've talked about stoicism, we got to hear about your journey. You know, how would you say, like, wrapping it all up between what we're doing together with Blueprints and the work that you've done at West Point and where you are now, you know, it's been a very personal journey for you, and you've gone back to school. So what's next for LoSco?
What's next for LoSco? You know what, man? I had a phone call earlier this week, kind of talking about some things. But I think I say that to say, you know, not that I altogether can like divulge the content of that conversation, but I say that to say that the conversation I had earlier this week was really encouraging in that, and this is just like my encouragement to all people, whoever might be watching, or like athletes, coaches, whatever it may be, having the courage to not have the answer is part of the process of growing that gives room and space for you to become who you need to be before you do what you're supposed to do. I think what's next for LoSco is
Nice. That was a great nugget. Like that. Nice.
I'm in this space now, man, where I am really investing. Yes, I'm still investing in others and doing all that kind of stuff, but I'm really truly investing in me and becoming the kind of person that can do the things that I want to do. So you know, I'm still coaching, right? I still have my my leadership coaching that I'm doing. I'm still doing I'm still doing seminary by the help of the Lord. And then I'm actually about to start doing some more things, getting more active within my community. But really, man, like what's next for me is to continue using my own experiences, my own voice, my own vulnerabilities to help other people discover, develop. Here's my thing. I want to help people discover, develop, and deploy their unique gifts so that they can make the world a better place. That's my life's mission. I want to help people discover, develop, and deploy their unique gifts so that they can make the world a better place. Emphasis on unique, because everybody's different. So what's next for me is more of that. I'm going to keep
more of that. Bring it.
And it's going to be fun, man. I'm looking forward to keep working with Blueprint, helping these athletes, and even within my church community, man. Like, I just feel like
where can people find you?
So online at LoScoSpeaks.com. That's LOSCO Speaks.com. You can find me there. All the different things, coaching things that I do are on that website. Instagram, you can see right here, official LoSco. And then, is that David?
Maybe. What do we got here?
He says, "Thanks for teaching us." I'm wondering if that's
Yeah, that's Dave, Dr. David Cool.
Okay, I was thinking that was him. It's good to see your name pop up on the screen, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, official LoSco there. Also on Twitter, official LoSco. That's LOSCO. You can find me in those spaces. If ever you need to reach out to me, you can reach out at info@LoScoSpeaks.com, and I'll be more than happy to chat with you if you have any questions or whatever we talked about today, or DM me on Instagram. I'm good.
Sweet. Thanks, LoSco. Appreciate you taking the time. You know, again, we're doing these chats over the month of June because it's Men's Health Month here, and so if you want to follow along all the events that our partner organization, the Canadian Men's Health Foundation, they're at menshealthfoundation.ca. They're also on Instagram and on Twitter and all the things, and they've got some movement practices, they've got some panelists, some chats, a lot of stuff on sports and mental health. And then, of course, our work at Blueprint. You know, me and LoSco got to talk a little bit about it today, so follow us on all the socials as well. And with that, I'll just say thanks again, LoSco, and for those of you that joined today for the conversation, and looking forward to seeing you again soon, LoSco.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah. Check you later.
All right, brother.
Bye.